Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Aly Cohen.
Thanks for having me.
Dr. Cohen is the author of an incredible consumer guidebook, The Non-Toxic Guide to Living Healthy in a Chemical World, which talks about all kinds of toxic exposures in our homes and schools, as well as cell phone and wireless radiation. And we're so thankful about that, as well as an integrative medicine book in which there's a chapter by Dr. Davis and other environmental health experts related to wireless radiation, and also covering education for medical doctors.
Mhm.
You are a board certified rheumatologist and integrative medicine specialist, and you create curriculum both for medical doctors as well as high schoolers and middle schoolers. And I'm just thankful to have you on today to talk about your book, what you're doing, and what's happening in the world of educating clinicians and the public. And you'll talk about the Smart Human, of course, which is your platform for educating on these issues.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And thank you for all the work you do, because for people who know you and are jumping on or don't know you, the incredible amount of work that you do, along with Environmental Health Trust, in really educating the public about particularly many topics, but particularly EMF radiation and exposure to cellular technology. It happens. I'm gonna have to let my dog out soon, I'm sure. But anyway, thank you for having me. So, just to jump right in, my journey into this topic was certainly haphazard. It was not something I would have ever expected to be involved with in terms of how chemicals, environment, radiation, stress, a bunch of other types of environmental exposures affect human health. And what happened was my dog became very sick, and I write about this in my book, Non-Toxic, with co-author Dr. Frederick von Saal. And I talk about how, as a young mom with two young kids, my golden retriever got very ill, and I was just so heartbroken. He was actually my firstborn before the kids, and I really didn't know why at such a young age he was so sick, 4.5 years of age. Long and the short of it is that he was discovered to have a terminal illness, autoimmune hepatitis in dogs, which is incredibly rare. And I began the journey out of guilt and sadness to figure out what might have caused this to happen, since he wasn't an older dog and it was so rare, not only in Goldens, but also in dogs. And as I was looking into what could have affected his health and triggered his immune system, such as drinking water or dog food that was contaminated, or toys that he was sucking and chewing on that were plastic, or had chemicals, his flea and tick collar medication, all of it, I started to unravel and understand how limited of regulation we have on as human beings, our products in the United States. And it was pretty mind-blowing. It was so mind-blowing that I often sat around looking at my cat going, is this for real? And having to reach out to all these specialists that I knew at the time, and find out if this is really true. And so I began my journey. That brought me now 9 years into this topic, and it's been a really wild journey of being freaked out and on a ledge about everything that's around me, to coming back down to earth and really putting together a book, along with, again, my co-author, who's world renowned in his work on endocrine disruption and chemicals, Dr. Fred von Saal. We came together to put together a book that was actually meant for someone who 9 years ago would have loved to have grabbed for it. And I think that, having come from a place of so little understanding to a place of so much understanding, I still have that perspective of, what would someone want to start with? Where would someone begin this incredible journey of swapping out chemical laden products, or changing their EMF habits with their cell phone technology? And why does it matter? So that's what brings me here today and talking with you. And I'm hoping that people who listen to this are really going to come away with not just this fear, doom and gloom, but really empowerment. The whole movement of, in my opinion, environmental health has to be empowerment for the next generation, for pregnant women, for grandparents, for anyone who wants to move forward and reduce chronic and acute illnesses. We have to do this because so much is at stake.
Yes, it's, I think about when I first learned about this issue, and it is shocking. And you can easily go to a non-inspired place when you first learn that just because it's on the market doesn't mean it's safe, and that there are, what is it, 90,000 chemicals which are on the market and not properly tested for safety. But there is so much going on in the world of environmental health, and people are really becoming aware. I mean, this is exactly the book that I wish I had when I first learned about this. When I found out my deck had so much arsenic, it tested with EWG way back when they were testing years ago, among the top in the entire state. And I was like, wait, what? Why didn't anyone tell me that I should be worried? We had it sanded with no protection, with my young children. The whole thing was just,
Is your outdoor deck, you said?
yeah, there's arsenic in wood at the
Wood
time.
that's treated for fun, and also flame retardants, not just arsenic.
Yeah, and that was like 2 decades ago when I first learned about it. EWG was a very small site. I also was contacting our water delivery service, asking about BPA in the water as a pregnant mom. So that was 20 years ago. And the owner of the company, who I finally got on hold, I said, look, there are studies showing a problem. And do you have plastic? I mean, is there BPA in the plastic, which was sitting outside in the sun when they delivered it? And he said, ma'am, you don't have to worry about that. There's just a little bit in there. And if you do not need to worry your little heart about that. I mean, he was so condescending to me. I was complete newbie. I was like, oh, and so let's talk about dose makes the poison for a minute, and endocrine disrupting chemicals. And I don't want to forget about cell phones and everything else, but this dose makes the poison issue is something that is important to educate people about, because it's not always the dose, right? So,
Well, I think most people, when they think about, exposures causing harm, you think that the more you're exposed, or the amount or the timing in terms of how
right,
often, how regularly, that creates a greater risk, right? I'll
right,
use an example from college. The more you drink, the more sick you're going to get, right? The more ice cream you eat, the more your belly might hurt. So we think of things in terms of the dose makes the poison, which is a very antiquated way of looking at things, but it's what most conventional toxicologists, really think in the way of these chemicals. Certainly the chemical companies, because they depend on this old theory of dose makes the poison in order to defend the products, the toxic products that go out to market. This was back in Paracelsus was the father of this expression, dose makes the poison. This is back in 1500s. So we're talking really outdated philosophy here in terms of our exposures, because really up until the past 60 years, we never really realized that you can have very, very, very infinitesimally small exposures, parts per million, parts per trillion, even parts per billion exposure to certain chemicals. And we're talking like a drop of water in like 100 swimming pools for parts per billion, maybe 20, swimming pools for parts per trillion. But those tiny exposures actually have been shown with chemicals called endocrine disruptors, which I'm going to go through some of the examples of those in our everyday lives, where those tiny, tiny doses, even over time, just tiny, tiny doses actually can have the same physiologic effects, good, bad, or ugly, but mostly bad, as the high dose exposures. And what that looks like on a curve is either a U, or it looks like, an inverted U or a J, as opposed to sort of that dose makes the poison linear line. That means as you go higher in exposure in dose, the more the health risks are. Whereas with the U, you can see that at the very low levels, you can have the same effects as the very high exposures. So we talk about that in the book because I want people to own the science behind the recommendations. And I want people to understand the history, the regulatory history in our country, in order to put into effect these changes. And you have to own it to really live it and buy into it and kind of commit to it. So I wanted people to have all the information they needed to sort of own those changes for their lifestyle.
So dose does not make the poison in terms of endocrine disrupting chemicals. And as well, as we can talk about later, it does not make the poison when it comes to cell phone and wireless radiation, as studies have shown, because there's both dose-related effects, as well as non-linear effects that have been found. And of course, which I'm sure you'll talk about, windows of vulnerability. Those times when the dose, be it so small, can have a great effect compared to if you were exposed when you're older as an adult, like children versus adult. So let's talk about endocrine disrupting chemicals and phthalates and how we can reduce exposure for people on the call. Just what do they need to know and what can they do?
Well, endocrine disrupting chemicals are a subsetted class out of all of these 95,000 chemicals. Let's start with this big umbrella of 95,000 chemicals in everything, in food, in water contamination, in our products like textiles, even, stain guard chemicals, non-stick chemicals, cleaning chemicals, air freshener chemicals. We have chemicals that make plastic soft, called phthalates. We have plastics, chemicals that make fragrance last longer, also phthalates. We have chemicals that make plastic hard. So there's all these thousands of chemicals. From those 95,000, some chemicals were tested, and by haphazardly, it was discovered that, for instance, bisphenol A was one of the first endocrine disrupting chemicals really identified, and has now over 800, 900 papers written about it. Bisphenol A, BPA or bisphenol A was really discovered haphazardly. And what ended up happening was the data that was collected was skewed because the mice involved were actually getting exposure from the plastic water drinking bottles. So the plastics from the drinking bottles were actually contaminating their feed and changing their biochemistry when they were tested for exposure to other stuff. And so people were like scratching their heads, these researchers. Bisphenol A, which is one of the now most high volume production chemicals worldwide, still is, but it was taken out of baby bottles. For those people out there who remember this, it was taken out of baby bottles that were plastic in 2012. That was actually largely undertaken by the work of my co-author, Dr. Frederick von Saal, and his international group of colleagues who studied this chemical. And bisphenol A, BPA, which is now used right now in all of our canned foods and drinks. It's the plastic lining that protects the food or drink in any can, organic or not, from the lining, the aluminum can. So they're lined with plastic. BPA is also on the surface of store receipts. It helps seal the ink as thermal paper goes through parking tickets, airplane tickets, currency, any receipts at supermarkets. That actually has a layer of BPA on 99%. There is some paper that does not have BPA on it, but very rarely. Costs more money. BPA is found in just a variety of hard plastics. It was originally discovered, Bayer made a clear aspirin bottle, which was unheard of at that time in the 1940s and 50s, that they could put together these monomers of bisphenol A, these compounds in very singular way, and you could create clear plastic. So they were really running with that when it first was discovered. So it makes plastics hard. And BPA happens to be one of the most well-studied internationally of all the endocrine disrupting chemicals. And what they found was that this chemical, in addition to all of its, very practical uses, which is why it took off, was also capable of disrupting hormones in the human body, specifically low-level exposures to estrogens. Could block receptors where those estrogens are supposed to meet their connector. Hormones are messenger systems in the human body. We've evolved for millions of years to do very, very specialized activities. And so hormones are signalers, and they need to be sent from one side and connect at a receptor somewhere in the body to get that message. And so these endocrine disruptors were able to disrupt those signals, whether it was decreasing the amount of chemical or estrogen that needs to be produced, or the amount that's androgens that are blocked, which are male hormones. It could decrease receptors. It could affect how chemicals such as BPA are broken down in the liver. So there's all these ways to disrupt. That's why the broad name endocrine disruption is so brilliant, because as the science began to evolve, the scientists began to see that there was many different ways that these chemicals, endocrine disruptors, could disrupt the final signaling. Well, what's the final signaling? It's glucose control with insulin, which is a hormone. It's fertility. It's growth and development in teenagers and children. It's growth and development of the in utero brain of a newborn being formed in utero. It's male organs, male genitalia that can be affected, such as the group of phthalate chemicals that can affect males' testicular dropping, as well as the genitalia size at birth. It's also IQ in newborns, in terms of following them out to see their IQ levels based on exposures of a pregnant mom. So we have all of these important hormone signaling processes in the human body, and can affect cancer, can affect diabetes risk, can affect autoimmune disease because they're immune system disruption, which I will be talking about actually in a new book in the future. But the idea that these chemicals can affect the endocrine system, the signaling system, was really profound and really threw science and classical toxicology on its head. And it's being fought left and right because of the real cost to the products that these chemicals are in.
So this has been going on. I mean, this is 20 years ago when I was pregnant and learning about BPA and endocrine disrupting chemicals. How do people reduce exposure in simple ways in their home? What do we need to do to kind of get started on that road?
Yeah. This is what I would have loved to have known 9-10 years ago. How can we begin the process of sort of disengaging ourselves from the chemicals that affect our health? The first thing is, first of all, take a deep breath. I've known that people have gone nuts over this, and I want people to I still color my hair. My kids occasionally have, their Skittles and M&Ms. They go and they have pizza parties. The idea is that you want to do what you can do in a reasonable amount of time that makes sense, that'll stick, and that won't really make you rebound into bad behaviors or bad shopping. Okay. So the first thing is take a deep breath. And then the second thing is, number one, start with low-hanging fruit. Start with the easy stuff. Okay. Number one, don't buy junk. Don't buy so many cleaning products that are now designed. The market's $1 billion industry, doorknob cleaners, window cleaners, sink cleaners, laundry detergent. There's 1,000 zillion things to clean because we are now taught that clean is good. Well, in fact, clean is not so good in many ways. I mean, certainly COVID, I'm going to put that aside for a second. But when we talk about everyday cleaning, we want to have an environment that's not dirty, but that has all the bacteria that we're meant to be exposed to, that affect human health and has been in a positive way for millions of years. We're not talking salmonella. You still have to clean your chicken, but you really want to think about the ultra clean process in our minds of why are we keeping up with the Joneses to such a degree. You can get enormous benefit from just white vinegar, sea salt for scrubbing, real lemon juice, Castile soap, borax, soap powder, the old-fashioned ingredients that really have been known to clean surfaces, clean environments for really, hundreds of years. And so if you don't buy these products filled with chemicals that, again, are not tested in the US before they go into the markets, go into these products, they're not tested for safety, toxicity in anyone, let alone pregnant women, children, immune compromised people. If we don't buy them, we won't have them in our home, which is where we get a huge exposure to many of these toxic chemicals. So yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so cleaning products, like I use vinegar and baking soda for everything, and fragrance free. Go fragrance free for anything that you do need to buy, like dishwashing soap, for example, or your laundry, which you also can make your own. But if not, go fragrance free. That's like a great first start.
Right, because phthalates, which is the group of chemicals that are endocrine disruptors, which have been connected to due to the work of Dr. Shauna Swan, who wrote a chapter in the textbook, also came out with her own recent book called Countdown, we'll talk about. But she did all of the really incredible work on the relationship between phthalate exposures in pregnant women and the rate and risk for newborn males having genitalia problems or issues in terms of development. So this information is really out there, but phthalates can keep fragrances lasting longer, which is why they're added to many products, cosmetics, cleaning products, to extend the shelf life of that fragrance, that odor, that perfume. So when you look at a label, look for the word fragrance or perfume and don't buy it, because that can have up to 300, 400 chemicals that are not disclosed to consumers. So you don't even know what you're spraying on yourself, your children, your bedding, whatever you use it for. So you want to avoid candles and incense and powders and carpet powders and laundry detergents. Anything with fragrance is a great way to start. I would also say with cleaning products that you don't want anything that says antimicrobial, antibiotic, antibacterial. Again, COVID is a virus. So anything that says antibacterial means it's antibacteria, which means it won't even affect viruses, technically speaking. Not only that, it comes with many, many, many toxic chemicals in any product that says antibacterial, like triclosan. Triclosan was taken off of the market in just hand soaps in 2016. Like Dial, I think people remember Dial antibacterial soap. It was actually required to be removed from Dial and many other liquid hand soaps, but it's in thousands of other products still. It's in hand wipes. And we want to avoid words like antibacterial, antimicrobial, Bactroban, Microban. All of these are antibiotics, and we don't want to be exposed to antibiotics because we won't respond to real antibiotics if we ever need them. It creates resistance. It also comes again with chemicals that affect our health. So those are endocrine disruptors, triclosan and others.
I remember I used to, and for years, bought the toothpaste that had my triclosan. Am I saying it right? Is it?
Yeah, triclosan, yeah. Colgate. It's actually Colgate.
And I thought, well, it says that it's going to make my teeth whiter. Forever, I bought that. And now, even when I go out, they still have it in a lot of camping gear and other products where they're putting antibacterial things on your carpet, for example, and carpet
or tile sealant. I remember we redid our tile years ago, and they were promoting tile sealant at Home Depot or whatever the big box stores as a promotional. You want your bacteria out of your bathroom tile. Well, in fact, you don't, because number one, it's an endocrine disruptor. Number two, again, it's going to create resistance. Your body is now going to not be able to respond if you in fact need antibiotics for pregnancy, or if you need it for a routine elective surgery. You don't want to be around antibiotics all the time, because your body will then not be able to respond to and be effective with real antibiotics that are really generated for these bacteria.
So can we talk also about, I know I'm hopping off of this whole world of phthalates, and I guess we should talk about cosmetics. And then I want to talk about body burden, but let's talk about cosmetics and that concept of body burden, which I think is really important for people to understand.
Well, cosmetics, again, like cleaning products, like all personal care products, are not in any way held to any requirement by US law for testing of those ingredients before you put them on your face, your eyes, your lips, your hair, your shampoo, your teenagers' skin, feminine care products in tampons and all of the feminine products. Really great work done by the Women's Voices from the Earth.
Oh, I love them.
If you want to check them out, they're actually doing a webinar coming up on, I'm not sure when it's going to be, but they do regular webinars on how to look at products and read labels, which I do in the book as well. But the idea is that, we are missing an entire area of intervening in our children's health and our health. If you're still having your periods, is that we are loading up tampons and feminine care products, they've been loaded with chemicals. And then
Right.
we're putting them inside our body, not even on our body, technically. We're inside our body. And those chemicals in that particular area in the vaginal canal is incredibly absorptive. In fact, medical doctors like myself prescribe estrogens sometimes that get placed in there because we know how absorptive they are. Just like the skin is very absorptive too, right? We use drugs like Dramamine and arthritis creams on our skin to get inside our body.
Right.
They're designed to do so. Well, so with these chemicals can often get into our body through skin, which is not as protective as we'd like it to be, and has been shown to show levels in teenagers as well. So we want to think about surveying our body, what we put in, on, and around us, whether we eat it, drink it, whether we put it on our skin, put it in the vaginal canal, these chemicals, or whether or not we're just spraying bug sprays in our home or air fresheners in our home, things that are around us that we're kind of doing without much thought, thinking it doesn't go anywhere. It does. It goes into dust. It goes onto flooring, on surfaces. In fact, dust has some of the highest levels of chemicals. And this has been well studied. So for nothing more, we want to dust a lot and clean up so that we don't have those chemicals for kids and pets on their paws and stuff like that.
And kids will pound for pound absorb more toxic chemicals than adults proportionately because they have all that hand and mouth, right? And they're closer to the floor.
And respiratory. And they breathe more air, more volume of air compared to adults. They drink more water than adults. So when we're really talking about canaries in a coal mine, we're talking children. And thinking about their exposure, not just my dog, who by size is also smaller, but children really do get into the muck the most. They're on the floor. They have toys that stick to dust.
Right.
And there's just an enormous amount of exposure that young people, which is why it's important to teach pregnant women, pre-pregnant women, families that want to start, have more kids. We want to think about how to not only teach this generation and the people listening, but the future generations from getting into this mess that we've created.
Right. And I think one of the things that sort of opened my eyes to this was when I understood that when they test chemicals, of which they test very little, they often test for one thing at a time. They don't test the fact that we are exposed to, as you talked about, what's outside, what's inside, the skin, all of these different exposures, be it from the creams or fragrance cleaning products or wireless radiation or magnetic fields, are all resulting in one total result in a person. And they're not doing those synergistic studies. If they do, it's two things, right? It's like,
it's mixtures. You're really describing the problem of mixture. This has been well studied also. If we're getting, exposure through our scrambled eggs with a nonstick pan this morning, and then, we throw on some shampoo and conditioner with some phthalates, and then we're laying on a couch with flame retardant chemicals. The list goes on. And so instead of freaking people out, I want people to realize that those are all exposures that end up in the same reservoir, which is your body, your kid's body. And that those mixtures have been studied to be synergistic. I mean, each of those chemicals may have their own risk, but when you add them to a pile of other chemicals, by the way, medications too, I want people to understand, I have a whole chapter in non-toxic on medications. I am not anti-medication by any standard. I'm a rheumatologist. These medications, many of them, if not, a lot of them in my field actually save lives. It's a commentary that chemicals, similar to medications, are studied with one outcome. They're looking for one outcome. They don't always see the downstream effects. So you want to make sure that even when you're mixing medications, which, obviously you have to talk to your doctors, but when you're mixing all of these things together, your body becomes sort of this mishmash. And so you want to think about how to reduce the stuff that makes sense, which is really the exposures to products, and food chemicals and contaminated drinking water. Those are the really big things to start with. And I think it makes sense just by volume of ingestion and exposure.
Right. And wireless radiation, there is a growing literature on synergistic effects. So when they've combined in animals, for example, a known carcinogen, of which we're exposed to known carcinogens all the time. And I think they simulated a mammogram, and then combined with cell phone radiation, that there is a tumor promotion effect from the known exposure. They knew the the mice would get cancer. But when it was that combined, they had much higher levels than each individual alone. And there's other research that the Ramazzini Institute has done on this as well, which is why whatever we can do to reduce just makes sense. Just like don't bring junk, delete the junk, right? You got those little plastic toys that everyone has at the birthday parties and things. Not necessary, like to the degree we can, right? Which is we don't need to bring it into our home. And also junk technology, like just things that are unnecessary. Let's start thinking about technology and using it intentionally. What
Right.
are we doing?
Strollers with iPads built in, tampons with sensors to tell you when your period is coming or going or filled up. I mean, come on. It's like most of the stuff that we're bringing into our lives is based on this wow factor, but ultimately we never really needed them to begin with. I mean, you know, we really are pulling in stuff that really can add risk as much more than any benefit.
Right. Well, so tell me about, in the book, you talk about wireless and cell phone radiation, and you are a doctor. What are your easy step recommendations for people about reducing wireless radiation?
So full disclosure, I have plenty of tech. I have a cell phone. And my kids actually are not 12 and 14, and they have cell phones, but they've been taught how to use them safely. And, you know, listen, convenience matters and all of that. And it's hard to just tell people to get rid of their tech toys. You want to do it in a way that makes sense, and you can certainly do it over time. But in the meantime, we really need to see how can we just reduce that exposure, because exposure to microwave or EMF radiation, you know, doesn't have to make our skin feel hot necessarily. Again, that's how it's been tested in the old days, is the temperature change when it's touching your skin. But we now know it doesn't have to change temperature of your skin to have an effect. We want to think about what are simple, practical ways that we can reduce exposure to EMF radiation. The first thing is to start with distance. These toys, these tech toys, the more they're away from your actual body, the less likely, or I should say less likely, the less exposure you're going to have. And I use the example when I walk through my kids' school where they have all the kids with their laptops on their lap. Now they're designed to be laptops, but they really shouldn't be, okay? Because we don't want an antenna source, which is a computer, right? If you're getting Wi-Fi and cellular, it's an antenna. It's working with a cell phone tower, and it's, you know, communicating up to 900 signals per minute. And same with the cell phone. And what you don't want is to put that radiation near really vulnerable structures, such as genitalia in adults and children, ovaries. You don't want it sitting on top of a pregnant belly. You don't want it near your breasts. You don't want to put your cell phones in your bra, which I have a relative who did that regularly until I told her. I mean, literally just couldn't believe sort of why she would do that, but she said it was convenient. So the idea is that you want to take these toys and get them a distance from your body. Put your computer on a table a foot away or two. Keep your cell phone on airplane mode, which cuts off that signal, and don't keep it near your head. Don't give it to children to put near their head. You know, American Academy of Pediatrics has also been stating many of these statements as well, because we now know, since children have thinner skulls and greater bone marrow that goes into the brain. I mean, in other words, thinner skulls where the radiation signal can get deeper into the brain, which has less myelin, less fatty material in the brain structures, that the signals actually go deeper when held to the ear in children, sometimes up to 10 times more radiation than even an adult who does the same activity, because of the thin skull and the changes in the brain in terms of its anatomy. So, you know, you want to turn on airplane mode whenever you're not using it. Download games so you don't have to use that cellular connection. It's already on the phone or tablet or computer. You want to keep phones away from a pacemaker. As a physician, I want people to know that. You don't want to keep a phone sitting in a breast pocket for convenience, because it can affect actually, you know, a pacemaker. You don't want to have it near your head at night, also because of circadian rhythm effects in terms of sleep disruption. There's questions of cell phones affecting insulin usage and glucose metabolism. So again, another reason to keep phones, cell phones, any technology away from your body. Turn off your server at night. It's usually a button if you're not using it at night. Talk to your schools about creating a system where you can turn off Wi-Fi during hours that are not necessary to have that Wi-Fi. In France, they don't allow cell phones, and they also, have cut out Wi-Fi in preschools. So we really want to think about what we can do better to really reduce those exposures. I'm trying to think of some other really important ones in terms of Wi-Fi. Let me give you another couple. So I said not to be near the body, but you also want to not use your cell phone in elevators or in cars where there's a metal casing that makes that energy try harder to get to your phone. It actually creates higher energy. You want to use blue blocker screens or apps that reduce the blue radiation, the blue light radiation, so that you don't affect the brain, the eyes, and kind of stimulate the brain, which can affect sleep as well. So just really getting an idea of how to cut off that signal when it's not necessary is really quite important. And that's not even going into the social aspects, of course, of technology, getting distracted, driving with cell phones has become a major cause of morbidity and mortality in this country with all age groups. Walking while distracted. There's funny videos of people walking into fountains because they're distracted. Well, those are real, they have life, health consequences too. ADHD, anxiety, depression, all of those things are tied. We talk about it all in the book. So if you need to show a teenager, it's an important area to dive in a little bit.
Yeah, in France and Cyprus, French Polynesia, and also Israel, they have restrictions on Wi-Fi and even the elementary grades as well. And I just heard with the new iPhone, oh shoot, I don't know if it's a 15 or 13, but the one that just came out, there was, news going out about how in France, because of the laws that they have, it has to come with a wired headset. Because for kids, you can't advertise kids putting that phone to their head or using the phones. And two, it comes with that. And if you go into a store, according to their law, and you say, I'm getting this for a child, they have to give you these hookups so that it's not near your head. And yet here in the United States, we're not afforded that. It's just like food coloring, right? And dyes. And in Europe, they have stronger laws. They also have a framework that has the precautionary principle as how they make their decisions. And here in the United States, we wait. We wait until the evidence is so established, which is dead bodies, sick kids, that there is action. And even now we don't have the action we need on those products, which we know to be dangerous.
No, actually, these by law in the US, if something's going to come off the market, it has to be done voluntarily by the manufacturer. And I'll give you an example. Yesterday on the Smart Human, which is my platform on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, the Smart Human podcast, thesmarthuman.com, I post regularly things that change in the market, interesting observations, nutrition, all of these things. And I just posted yesterday how Coppertone is removing some of their sunscreens from the market voluntarily because of the chemicals that many have heard are in many sunscreens that have, are carcinogenic.
Right.
And so what was really shocking is to me, or maybe not to most people, is that it took a voluntary action by the company to remove it. Our laws don't mandate taking them off the shelves, even with the findings of benzene in the products. We don't have the regulatory oversight and ability to do that in this country. It has to be voluntary. So even that's shocking that once we find a problem, there was a hair shampoo company, I think it was Wen perhaps, that was people were losing hair. And the only reason it came off the shelves or came off the internet or TV where it was advertised was when they voluntarily took it away.
What I think about is how the scandal is not what is illegal. The scandal is what is illegal. That's the scandal here, that it is legal to have all this on our shelf, that it's legal not to test these chemicals before they come on the market, that it's legal to test cell phones against an adult male head which is plastic, this fiberglass plastic material with liquid in it to simulate the head. And then they put a temperature in the little pretend head.
Which is outdated and ridiculous, because again, we're talking about small children, we're talking about prenatal exposures, and so you're using this dummy with water in it that's the size of an adult.
Sugar water.
Just like drinking water, contaminants are based off of drinking, 2 liters of water a day, or in an adult male, and there's just really outdated regulatory oversight, and that's because the market has been so handed over to manufacturing.
Right.
I mean, this is really prominent. And one of the huge reasons I got into this area was because who is fighting for the consumer? In terms of giving really good practical information to manage, well, that's why we came up with the book, Non-Toxic Guide to Living Healthy in a Chemical World. If we're waiting for regulatory bodies to come to save us, now that we know there are problems, we're going to be waiting an awful long time. And the result of which is I'm seeing more and more patients, young patients even, with autoimmune disease, thyroid conditions, insulin, resistance, and prediabetes. Mm-hmm. So we're seeing an epidemiology mess of chronic illness, most of which are driven by environmental exposures, not all. Most of which, again, there's a genetic component to everything, but we're talking about just this enormous influx of chemicals over just 100 years of our 4.5 million years of evolution. We've had 95,000 chemicals added to our lives in just 100 years.
And it's going into the water, that goes into the land, that goes into our food. It's just being dumped in. And the US government needs to tighten their laws. We, the consumers, can use our pocketbook for that. So that's why what I tell people, sometimes they start to go pale, they start to hear about this and go, wait, what? And then they're going to pass out. It's like, wait, start with that low hanging fruit. Let's do what we can. But we got to get, ultimately, once you kind of get your home to where you feel like, okay, I got it, because it takes a little time, identify, throw out the junk, bring in the healthy stuff. Really, you just delete a lot, and you get pretty far by deleting.
And you save money. You save money. I mean, so if we're talking about even just our pocketbooks, you can save an enormous amount of money by not even buying the vast majority of products we bring into our home.
That's right.
Just to keep it clean. Just to maintenance it. You can get a stainless steel pan anywhere locally, and you can get rid of nonstick pans. You can get rid of your plastic Tupperware. Every supermarket has glass containers. You can get stainless steel for kids so they don't drop it and break anything. That is possible. You can get American made stainless steel cups and saucers and plates. So there's a hack for everything. And we try to think of everything, even soccer turf, which my 2 boys play sports, and they love their sports. And there's issues with grass, sports facilities, and there's issues with turf. So I jumped in and I made my recommendations, because this is how I'm finding my way through managing their joy of sports. So, there's a way to do all of this. And what I tried to do is make it that anyone, no matter what your scientific background, no matter what your socioeconomic background, that you could dive in and start making real changes to the health of your own body and to the health of your children, but also future generations, because there is a genetic component where these can affect your genes moving forward. So we really want to, just dive in, but know that it's practical for everybody to make these changes.
Yeah. And then raise your voice at the state level, or as you did at the local level. I did that too with my playground. We got a whole bunch of playgrounds with shredded tires turned back over to shredded wood, just by going to meetings and speaking out. Now, we didn't succeed in the soccer playing fields here in the Washington, D.C. area, but we've finally gotten to the point where now they're starting to use a less toxic artificial turf. I think we have some ways to go, but at least they are making changes here in Montgomery County. I live in the.
Oh, I'd love to hear that company and talk about that, because if I can help move the ball down the field in those areas, then I'm going to give them the resources that deserve to be applauded. And we should applaud the companies that are doing well and give them attention, because it's so important to give those companies their voice.
It's safe, healthy playing fields. For anyone listening, has a lot of resources on it, and you can look up what they're doing in Montgomery County. But now they will not use the shredded tire. Like, they won't start off because of parents. because of people who've said, hey,
Yeah.
this has got to be fixed. And if you just keep at it, because when you start out, right, it's going to be
Yeah.
like, no, come on, what do you, it's everywhere. What are you talking about? But you just keep at it, you grow, you build, and you inspire people to join this important change, which is happening around the country. I mean, I remember when before BPA was pulled out, that was, as you said, that was kind of they weren't forced to, right? Didn't they do that? And that is because of the pressure of mothers and
Same
fathers.
with flame retardant chemicals in California. That was sort of the, we in 1975, that was sort of the way to go, was flame retardant chemicals were added to couches and home furnishings to create a 12-second burn time on couches. If you dropped a lit cigarette onto the couch, you would have 12 seconds to get out. And in fact, that was really pushed by the cigarette industry.
That's
They didn't
right.
want to change their cigarettes. We gave the whole story in non-toxic, because I think when you hear some of these stories, they're shocking, but you can also understand why it was so important to get flame retardant chemicals as much as we could out of couches in 2013. And that was voluntary, but it was, as you mentioned, it was a push by parents and consumers, and just a real outrage that those chemicals were endocrine disruptors, how to get those out. And little by little, you can now look at the label, which we have in non-toxic, to show the difference between a couch that has flame retardant chemicals, conventional old toxic ones, versus how to find a couch based on the label of the newer couches that do not and have removed those.
Yeah, and we need to do more on labeling for other exposures. I know Women's Voices for the Earth, which I love, they were talking about, I think it was New York, where they have a bill now in, we should know when we go to buy menstrual products, what's in there. Why aren't they telling us what's in these products? We should know what that is so that we can make that decision, just like with couches, right? Because I know when we had to buy a new couch a few years ago, it was like, oh, you're looking up every couch, you're calling the manufacturer. Do they have this? Do they have that? It wasn't right there in front of me. I know a lot has changed in the last few years, although I don't think we're completely there, but I know there have been some very big changes thanks to California. So, and then that is all takes time and research, which is why when it's in one book, it's the way to roll.
We wanted people to have a reasonable list of manufacturers, at least at this point. We wanted people to understand that there are vetted resources, but we wanted to vet them. Fred Vomsal and I wanted to vet them. We wanted to know that these were evergreen sites that would have some longevity in the market if you looked them up in 5 years. And we wanted to make sure we didn't endorse any products or companies specifically, because, our job as people who convey science is to not muddle it with our own business relationships. And so our job was to really give great information that was practical, but gave people the fishing rod, not the fish, so that they could constantly have a guide to doing this again and again in the future.
Right. Well, I hope that in terms of wireless radiation, that we start to be in a place where we can recommend, where these companies, of which we know their names, the big companies, start to have products where we can, with one switch, turn off the antennas if we don't want that.
It makes sense. That means it's a win-win, because they still can, obviously get their products. I mean, 5G is coming. It's already been around, as you know, for the work you do. 5G is being sold as the great messiah. And to be honest with you, 5G is pretty scary. They're going to be filling up this country with even 8,000 or 80,000 new antennas.
800,000 facilities are needed to tie together the Internet of Things.
And they make their way, radiation can make their way through building walls, even more so than they were able to with 4G, which is 4 generation, 5 generation, 3 generation. So we talk about how do you even begin understanding cell phone radiation from like soup to nuts in the book. And then we really talk about where this is going and what you should try to avoid as we move forward with technology, to not get trapped into technology that has never been tested for human health. And it's like a whack-a-mole. We're chasing after old products that are already infused in our lives that we love, when we may find out that they're actually pretty harmful and have to give them up. And they're expensive. So we want to think about moving forward in a very judicious way. And this book gives some guidance to that in terms of what to look for and how to handle it. But yeah, I mean, radiation is an exposure that people don't weigh a lot of, just like drinking water, which happens to be a really big topic in my world. I lecture all over the place on just simply the topic of drinking water in the United States, because I think people just take it for granted. We always take it for granted because it ends up on our, table when we go to restaurants. And, we walk around through life thinking that someone is overseeing it, when in fact, we have to really do more of the work than we thought.
Right. Well, like I don't think it's in the book because it just happened, but we just won our federal lawsuit against the Federal Communications Commission, where we were addressing the fact that no health and safety agency of the United States, none ever, has looked at, in the last 25 years, looked at all of the science and determined, are the limits that we have safe? These limits, which are based on science from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and small animals, small little studies, like teensy studies, actually, a lot of them. And that's how our limits were developed. And because it's not a chemical, right? So it's not getting, there is no agency that is actively researching it and ensuring safety. At least with the EPA, they're looking at some things, or with drugs, the FDA ensures that before they come to market, even though there are problems, but they do have tests that have to be done. This radiation is not even treated like a drug. It would be illegal if it were.
Imagine if we could see it. It's like the microscopic chemicals, the parts per billion, parts per million, trillion. When I teach high school students, I do one experiment where I drop, in a big thing of water, 1 drop of coloring liquid. And I show them that it makes no difference, but that could be lead in the parts per million comparatively to that jug. We are really living in a world that if we don't see it, we don't believe it. And even when we see it, sometimes we don't believe it, to be honest with you. But if you were to see how radiation splays out across our everyday lives, and it was covered in pixie dust, I think people would be mind blown to actually see the amount of radiation that's hitting them at all times, everywhere they go. And again, it's not to say, oh gosh, here we go again, another thing to be afraid of. Well, it's a matter of just managing in modern life. We have to manage what we've created so that we can continue to live healthy lives and have healthy lives for our kids. So it's a matter of managing a difficult situation. And that's, the goal here is to educate and to help people practical information to feel empowered.
It's just like having seatbelts in cars. We need the same, we need airbags and seatbelts for our technology. It's come out too fast. I mean, faster than really any other environmental exposure in this century. It's just, we didn't have everything we have, that we can't see it, but it's very much there. And it was not like it is. It wasn't 20 years ago. I got my first cell phone when I was pregnant with my first daughter. And, we used it for 20,
right? It was like, hi, honey.
It was 20 minutes a month, free. So I only used it 20 minutes a month. Hi, honey, don't forget the milk bag. That's what I did, right? And we didn't have, I mean, what the kids are exposed to now is just, whoa, a whole other situation. And
it's hard as a parent. You and I are both parents. I mean, I have 2 teenage boys. And if I tell you how many times I'm screaming at them, put airplane mode on before you put that in your pants. I want to be a grandmother. And I'm saying this while they're going into school and they're like, shut up, mom. But, the fact is that we have risks to sperm count and infertility in our teenagers if they're constantly putting a cell phone that's wired in their, in their front pants pocket. It's like putting your stuff in a microwave, I say to them, so we have to really think about, giving kids the idea that it's okay to have communication and for pickups and drop-offs and God forbid emergencies, but we need to make sure that they're using them regularly. It's become part of the culture to not have these toys so close to their bodies all the time. And just give them very simple suggestions as to how to do that. And mine generally are now in a culture where they do it automatically. I even check their phones when I wake them up in the morning, and sure enough, they're on airplane mode. So, I think that we can get to a point where that's considered normal if you just get on them a little bit.
Yeah, and there really should be education in schools. I'm actually going to be testifying at a Manhattan, Massachusetts right to know cell phone kind of right to know and wireless device. So I have to get off in exactly 5 minutes.
Oh,
Um, but
that's a good
uh,
reason.
yeah, so I'm just glad that you're doing this educating. We also have a curriculum developed with the Massachusetts Breast Cancer Association, and I just think every school should have this curriculum where they're teaching people, and not just high schoolers and middle schoolers, but we got to go down to elementary at this point, because when they can understand, hold hands when you cross a street. You
Yeah,
need
it's
to look
building
what
a culture. You're building a
yeah,
culture. Anything you teach someone over and over again becomes part of the normalcy of their lives.
right,
And I think, again, when you start, we talked going green years ago. No one knew what that was. Now we know what the expression going green is
right.
really for our environment. We need to think about creating that culture going green for our bodies. We need to create that culture where it's part of our living life, our active lives, where we're thoughtful about these exposures at a younger age than even adults.
Right. And so people can reach you at The Smart Human. And your book again is Non-Toxic Guide to Living Healthy in a Chemical World. And is there anything else you want to add about your platforms? You're on Twitter and Instagram?
Yeah,
And
Facebook is by far the most, I would say, comprehensive. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I post, and it's funny and it's interesting nutrition. It's for every age group. Don't just think it's for adults. I have literally hundreds of, almost 50,000 people following, and most of them, or many of them, I should say, are in the, 20 to 50 age group. So please have your kids and teenagers. But I also have a podcast that I'm very proud of, where I interview very smart, interesting researchers in endocrine disruption and environmental health, lawyers that are environmental lawyers, what to think about when you buy a home, just really intellectually smart people who have done some great work, whose voices aren't always heard. But I think it's a different perspective, and I'm hoping people will listen to the Smart Human podcast. But yeah, all of the above, I think, get involved. Teach your teachers and principals something if you have kids in schools, daycares, and really speak up, because we're in a place where we have to help our kids and ourselves be healthier in the future for their generations after.
well, thank you so much, Dr. Cohen, and we'll be in touch. I appreciate you making this with us. This will be on all of our platforms, so both as a podcast and as well as a video, and I appreciate all the work you're doing.
You as well, Theodora. Thank you again for the time, and thank you, audience.
Thank you.